Get ready for your unofficial dental hygiene podcast. These are the tales of two hygienists, one East Coast RDH and one West Coast hygienist. Listen as they tackle the profession of dental hygiene with humor and enthusiasm. Now, please join Michelle Strange and Andrew Johnston as they tell you a tale of two hygienists.
Hey everyone, welcome back to a bonus episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists podcast. My name is Andrew.
And my name is Michelle.
So for those new to the podcast, each week Michelle and I bring on an amazing guest from the dental world who fills our nerd brains with new insight or affirms our clinical abilities.
And we are so grateful for the time and effort these guests put into making us better. We also wanted to acknowledge that this episode is powered by Crest Oral-B, and this episode wouldn't be possible without them.
And we know you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. So welcome everyone to a bonus episode brought to you by Crest Oral-B. Today we have on the show Paul Sagel, and we're going to be talking about whitening. Paul, thank you so much for making time to be on the show with us.
Thanks for having me.
So I think, we have lots to get into today. Lots of questions about whitening. I feel like the patients, it's one of the number one questions that the patients always ask us about. It's one of the things that us as clinicians always have to be talking about, but I think that sometimes we get it a little bit wrong. And so I wanted, of course, we're going to jump into that in a little bit, but let's start with maybe your background. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, kind of your experience and where you're coming from?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my name's Paul Sagel. Born and raised in Cincinnati. I went to school in Cincinnati, and I'm still in Cincinnati, so I guess you'd call it Cincinnati homegrown. I work for Procter & Gamble in oral care. I've been with the company now 28 years. All 28 years with my experience with P&G has been in oral care for the predominance of it. And I've been fortunate enough to have been working now in the whitening industry since 1996. And I've studied tooth whitening more than I've studied anything else in my entire life. In fact, I've worked on tooth whitening more than anything else I've done in my life in total. So it's become who I'm synonymous with. So when they talk about the whitening guy, a lot of people introduce me, this is Paul, and nobody really cares. And they say he's the guy that invented Whitestrips, and then they seem to care.
Exactly.
I think mostly because they want free product, but nonetheless, at least starts the conversation anyway.
Do you stare at people's teeth every time that people talk now?
Oh yeah. It's a really bad thing. I look at people's teeth, I go, it's so simple to fix. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
It's for me, somebody walks in and they have yellow teeth, and it's just like, oh man, it's like, gotta fix that. And it's, there's a neat thing around synergies and color balance with your entire face and symmetry. And one of the things that's just something that jumps right out at me is if your eyes and your teeth are just drastically different colors, it's like, wow, especially if your teeth are really yellow. Now, I know people whose eyes are yellow and teeth are white, but that's a different issue.
I think they got some jaundice going on. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know. Like that's a bigger health concern.
That's right.
So I have to ask though. So Crest Whitestrips. Tell us about your involvement with Crest Whitestrips and maybe like the product development process, like what that looks like.
So I started working on tooth whitening when I was relatively young with the company. I'd only been with the company about 4 or 5 years, and it was a time in which we were trying to first establish whether tooth whitening was even effective or not, because the majority of what I would call tenured scientists in the field, the people that I started working with that had 30 years when I walked in the door, weren't quite sure. It was one of those things where your tooth color is what it is, and there's just not a lot you can do about it. So they kind of asked me to take a look at it. And it was a bit of a interesting situation in that when I looked at the problem, I looked at it a little differently than everybody else did. And so the first thing we did is did some research. Does professional tooth whitening work? And certainly it does, and it's completely safe. And it's just a question of, well, what makes it tick? And as I started to go back and peel it apart and look at it, I'm an engineer by training, I started to get into some of the fundamentals around why the product would work. And I quickly took a position that I thought it was a diffusion limited problem, a processor challenge. And other people thought it was reactivity. In other words, if you could increase the reactivity of peroxides, it would work faster and better. I was kind of in the minority there, but I did some work as an undergrad working on dialysis or artificial kidneys and trying to improve that process because it's relatively long. Back in the 90s, it would take 4 or 5 hours to have your blood go through and clean it up. And so I was really familiar with boundary layer theory and surface layer phenomena and diffusion. And so when I looked at it, I said, this is right up my alley. It's what I study. And long story short, what I was able to realize in a very short period of time was you really don't need a very thick layer of peroxide on the tooth to whiten. And in fact, I wouldn't even call it a layer. I was able to show that layers you couldn't even see would be effective. And so as I started to study this process, I quickly realized that the role of the device is not to hold a bunch of stuff. In other words, trays with reservoirs and those types of things was kind of the trend at the time, where they thought if you put more gel in, obviously it should work better. And I kind of took a different approach, which says it doesn't matter how thick the layer is, it should work. And so the only thing the device needs to do is keep your lips and tongue and saliva from washing it away or decomposing it. And so through a pretty rapid series of kind of creating prototypes to see what would work, I landed on an idea of a strip. Okay, and the original strip idea I had was way too complicated. It was a strip composed of different wells where I'd put adhesive in one well and peroxide in a different well and an activator in a different well, and of these pocketed plastic strips. And what I realized is that doesn't matter. You can use bleaching composition because it's adhesive enough. And in fact, the surface tension of the composition is holding on just perfectly. And so I put some bleaching composition I made in the lab on a piece of food wrap that we were developing at the time. And so if you think about the Glad food wrap, the Press and Seal food wrap, that's what we were also developing at Procter & Gamble at the same time. I put some of the composition on it, put it on my teeth, and I said, this is it. Couldn't hardly tell I had it on. Nobody else could tell I had it on. And a couple of days passed. Next thing you know, I'm 5 years with the company, and I'm sitting in front of the Chief Technology Officer, Gordon Brunnan. He looked at it, kind of took one of my prototypes, put it on, he goes, this is it. Okay, and we were off and running. Now, that sounds really simple, but then the challenges really set in from a product design standpoint around making sure the product's stable so that it can make it through distribution systems, making sure that the user, the patients, know how to use it so the instructions are right, making sure we did all the safety work around bleaching to show that in fact it did whiten teeth but was not harmful to enamel. And surprisingly, when we started doing this work, there was virtually no research out there that was able to demonstrate that the bleaching process was in fact safe. And we did a lot on that area to make sure the safety was first and foremost.
Man, what a journey.
Oh, it has been.
I mean, if you would have been like, Michelle, who do you think invented Crest Whitestrips? And I'd be like, I don't know, probably some random dentist.
No, chemical engineer. You know, it's an engineering process. And a lot of people ask me, are you a dentist? I said, no, I'm a chemical engineer. Sometimes they ask me, what train do you drive? I think, no, it's not that kind of engineer. It's a chemical engineer. And, you know, the difference between a chemical engineer and a chemist is chemical engineers design chemical systems, whereas chemists get into more of the fundamental chemistry. So I have a blend of both. And at this point in my career, I don't know what I am. I started off as a chemical engineer, but I've studied dentistry and oral biology for a very long period of time. So I kind of look at myself as an oral biologist, oral engineer type of person.
Have the white strips changed or adjusted a little bit over time, or is it still like kind of the same product?
No, it's very different. So when I first developed the first white strips, we were thinking more around the types of concentrations that were commonly used. So if you think back to the days when the night guard vital bleaching technique started in the late 80s, 89, Van Haywood and others published the first article on it. It was all 3.3% hydrogen peroxide or 10% carbon peroxide. It's the same. And so we started there. But one of the things I realized pretty early on was that when you're using thin layers of peroxide, you have a much expanded range of concentration that you can use without causing problems. And the reason is this. Whenever you whiten your teeth, the composition touches the teeth, but it also touches the surrounding soft tissues. And in the context where you don't control the amount, you can overwhelm the soft tissue's ability to decompose and dilute hydrogen peroxide. So our bodies are equipped with enzymes, catalase and peroxidase, that when they see peroxide, they decompose it into oxygen and water. And you go, that's kind of interesting. Well, it's in there because our immune system is based on peroxide. So we have a natural defense system. That defense system is based on an amount of peroxide, not necessarily a concentration. So when you think about the oral cavity, you have two different dynamics. You're on the tooth, you want to have a high concentration to diffuse, and we'll get into that mechanism here hopefully. But on the soft tissue, you really want it to decompose it to oxygen and water before it overwhelms that system and starts to cause some tissue irritation. And so one of the beautiful things about the strip is we make thin layers, but we use much, much higher concentrations. So in the context of our strips and even our professional strip, we go as high as 14% hydrogen peroxide, and we don't need a gingival barrier because we can stay within what I'll call that soft tissue capacity for peroxide. So we can, as we take up concentrations, we actually make the layers thinner and thinner to make sure that soft tissue tolerability is acceptable.
Yeah, that's okay, because that has definitely been something on my mind, because even back in the day of making bleaching trays, like we were so careful to not get it on the tissue, right? And we'd have patients come back in and have these little tissue burns, and we'd have to just coach them into like wiping it off of the gum tissue. Don't let it sit there. And I always wondered how Crest Whitestrips worked and did not create that tissue burn. Yeah,
that's it. And so I use an analogy. It's kind of like and I can't figure out a better analogy than this, but it's like a good old bar fight. Okay, so as long as you've got 5 guys and they got 5 guys or gals or whoever's going to decide to scuffle, it's usually pretty even. It's really great if you have more people on your team than they do on their team. But when they walk in with 100 and you only have 5, you're going to lose. So when you overwhelm the soft tissue peroxide capacity, it's that. There's a fight going on of who's going to win. And if you have more molecules of peroxide than you do ability to decompose it, it causes irritation. And it doesn't matter for concentration. In other words, if you think about concentration, how close together those people were standing, it doesn't matter. There's only 5 of them. Or it doesn't matter how close they're standing together, but there's 100 of them. Okay, so dose is something, the total amount of peroxide is something that was largely ignored in the days of tray development back in the late 80s and early 90s. And then there's another thing, and I'm not trying to tell you trays are bad, they're great, but what you just said is really true. When you put a tray on, it's almost impossible to load it perfectly. Okay, you either underfill it or you overfill it. You never get it exactly right. If you overfill it, when you put it on, all the excess builds up at the margin. So the area where you don't want a lot of peroxide, you get it there, and then, Michelle, your recommendation is exactly right. Just wipe it off or brush it off, and you generally don't have the soft tissue effects. But that's exactly why the strips can do it, is just because the layer is thin. And so the total amount of peroxide that you apply onto the tissues is really low, even though the concentration on the tooth is high.
And how did you guys decide, like, how long this was going to, like, have patients keep it on X amount of time? And if they do leave it on longer, how are we not going to create problems? Because we all know patients love, like, more is always better. And we're like, no.
More is better, yeah.
They'll keep it on for 3 days. And we're like, no. I'm like, my daughter's wedding's coming up. No.
Exactly. Well, people do that, as you know. So,
yes.
In trays and strips, in all bleaching products, the amount that you apply the concentrations you apply to your teeth, it drops. And so it starts at the application, and then almost all systems have what they call a half-life. When does it reach half the initial concentration? And whether it's a strip or a tray or whatever, they all tend to go about half the original concentration in somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. Okay, everything else is now starting to go down. And so by the time you get to 60 minutes or 90 minutes of trays or strips, the concentration has dropped off a lot. And so the efficacy is also dropping off. Now, what doesn't stop is the ability to dehydrate the teeth. So all the gelling agents and the adhesives and those types of things, they continue to pull water out. And what we've learned recently on our development with the emulsions is the dehydration of the teeth amplifies tooth sensitivity. So what we've determined is between 30 and 60 minutes is the optimal time where you're getting called the 80 for 20 on efficacy, but you're not getting into the area where you cause what I'll call problematic sensitivity. And we're talking beyond the zinger. We're talking about, wow, I can feel it. We're talking about, I'm calling the doctor and I'm trying to figure out how to make my teeth quit hurting because I want to pull them out right now. And so, and let me just say, even in the case where you have severe sensitivity, that is not a safety problem. It's an annoyance. Okay. So we've studied tooth bleaching products all over the place, and it is not a safety issue. It is a quality of life issue, but not a safety problem.
Well, that actually, if we could just quickly digress to your original comment, like that you studied the safety of bleaching. Like, what were the original, because Andrew and I both came into dentistry like early 2000 and late 2000s. Like, what was some of the original concerns around bleaching? Like that it was stripping the enamel or weakening the enamel?
We didn't know. I mean, honestly, we kind of looked at it early on. I'm talking in the late 90s. We didn't really know what was doing to the enamel structure. And, I just kind of assumed while these products are out there, they must be safe. As I started to look for the research, it was really non-existent. And so we did some really cool stuff where we went back and bleached teeth ranging from just a little bit to a massive amount of bleaching. And we used a technique called confocal laser microscopy. And that's a technique by which you can recreate the 3D structure of the tooth, including the important things like collagen or those proteins that hold the enamel prisms together to make sure that you're not destroying the integrity of the tooth. And what we found is that in the case of peroxides, you can't. Okay, it's just not possible to destroy the tooth structure with peroxide. That'll just make a little bit of a sidebar here. If I were to use not hydrogen peroxide, but hypochlorite, a chlorine-based bleach like you would find in Clorox, it will destroy the tooth structure because its oxidative power is too strong. Peroxide is perfect for this. It has enough oxidative power to get rid of the stains, but it does not even come close to changing the structural integrity of the teeth or damaging any of the pulp tissues. So in all the years we've been whitening teeth as an industry, and I can only speak for Whitestrips because I have our database, but we launched the product in 2000 or 2021. We've never had a single issue with a tooth becoming non-vital from bleaching.
So let me ask this. What features are important in whitening, and feel free to go as deep and nerdy as you want to on this, that are important to engineers/scientists that may or may not be as important to like the consumer?
Okay. So for me, the choice of active is super important. Okay. And I'm going to tell you that all the products that we generally come across are fine. So whether you're using hydrogen peroxide or carbonate peroxide, both of them are fine. I've studied them ad nauseum. Those are the only things I would use. You will start to see that because of regulations outside of the U.S., people are developing whitening actives that are not peroxide. And there's two of them that are becoming popular. One is chlorite. Okay, and you'll either see it listed as chloride or you'll see it listed as chlorine dioxide sometimes. But these chlorine-based bleaches are pretty strong. Okay, they do have the ability at sufficient concentrations to cause some structural problems, and our body lacks a defense mechanism against it. So those enzymes I mentioned against peroxide are the same ones that if you put peroxide in a cut, you see it bubbling. When it comes to chlorine-based bleaches, anything with chlorine in it, Cl minus, we do not have a defense mechanism against that. So the tissue effects can be real. And what I find is that in actives outside of peroxide, if the efficacy works, the safety and the tolerability is not so good. So what you'll find is in those scenarios, if it says it is based on that technology, it either doesn't work or it's not very tolerable. The other one that we're starting to see come around is one that's called, this is a mouthful, okay, which you'll recognize. Just remember, it begins with a PTH. It's called thaliamidopyroxycaproic peroxycaproic acid. Okay, that is a big, long, hairy name, and it's a big, long, hairy molecule, too. It doesn't really whiten teeth. Even in vitro, it doesn't really work. And so I've never even taken the time to study the toxicology or the safety of it because I can't even get it to whiten teeth. So that one I don't think works. The second thing is there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the whitening industry. Okay, there's these miracle things where people say, put this on there, no big deal, swipe it on and you're done. Now I'm going to put my tongue in cheek here for a minute. You have to have contact time. Okay, so every product that you use, whether it's a tray or a strip, a paint-on, whatever, if it doesn't have contact time, meaning it's not in contact with the tooth surface for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 hours, it's not going to work very well. Okay, and you leave your patients and users relatively unwhitened. So that's one of the things I look for is the contact time. And then secondly, just making sure that the concentration is not outrageous. And that they've accounted for the concentration in the product design by either having a thin layer if it's over, so-called 5 or 6%, or it's in the 3 to 6% range, and it doesn't really matter. You can put a lot of that stuff on and not have an issue. So those are the primary things to do. Stay in the peroxide base. Doesn't matter if it's carbamide peroxide or hydrogen peroxide. There's a ton of misinformation out there about one's the more stable version of the other, and that's just not true. One does not whiten better than the other. That's not true either. So those are the key considerations from a science standpoint.
You mentioned contact time, and I think this would probably maybe be a good time to transition into the new product that Crest is coming out with. It's the Crest Whitening Emulsions. From what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, the application of this is you wipe it on.
Yes, I just told you that won't work, right?
So maybe explain a little bit more about why are we switching from a system where there is something to protect that contact time and keep that contact time in longer to something that is maybe a little bit more removable.
Yeah, so let me kind of give you the background on the new product, the emulsions, because it's super exciting. An emulsion.
It's very cool.
Have you tried it, Michelle?
I've used it. Yes. And I was actually shocked it stayed on my tooth.
Yeah. And it doesn't feel bad, right? So some of the things that stay on your teeth don't feel so great.
No, it feels very slick.
And smooth and minty and all kinds of fun. So let me just start with a little bit of a basics about what an emulsion is, because a lot of people may not be familiar with that term. An emulsion is a term used to talk about the mixture of one substance and another where they don't like each other, but you force them together anyway. And you say, well, what do you mean?
Like this podcast, Andrew and Michelle, right?
No, you guys are great. But when you think about if you go get oil and vinegar for your bread, okay, and you come out and one's brown and one's yellow, and then you got to mix them up and they form these neat little droplets and you stick your bread in there and then they re-separate. That's an emulsion. It's a very simple emulsion. And another emulsion that we're familiar with is milk. And so milk is water with fat droplets suspended in it. Okay, so they're usually two liquids that are forced together through mixing processes that really don't necessarily like each other, but because of how you put them together, they say, all right, for the time being, I'll hang out. When your milk starts phase separating, you know it's no good. When the oil and vinegar parts ways, you go, man, I need to mix that back up. And so I started looking at emulsions for tooth whitening. And the reason I did is emulsions are very efficient delivery vehicles because one phase wants to get away from the other phase. And the idea I had here is bleaching gels are interesting because they're thickened, but the thing they thicken them with also likes the peroxide. So all gels, including white strips, they kind of like the peroxide, so they don't release it so that it's not 100% available. And I thought, man, if I could overcome that, I could even boost the performance a little more. And so I started looking at something called a water and oil emulsion, where I put the peroxide in the water phase, and then I had an oil phase around it. And I started looking at it and going, wow, the peroxide comes out of it really well, because this really doesn't want to be in there. It's a what they call a hydrophilic phase, meaning it likes water, dispersed in a hydrophobic phase, meaning it doesn't like water, it's like oil, and it just so happens that the tooth surface is hydrophilic. So when you put an emulsion, a water and oil emulsion on the tooth surface, the water phase wants to go to the interface and get out of the oil. And I said, that's great. And so I was able to show that worked really well. But then I was also able to show that there is a unique interaction with some of these oil phases and the tooth surface, in that you can smear them on there and they hang around a long time because they're water insoluble. So what happens with the emulsion is I've got these micro droplets of peroxide solution suspended in a hydrophobic carrier like an oil. When you put it on, it paints on. The matrix stays there because it does have some affinity for the tooth surface, but those droplets immediately migrate to the surface. And then that hydrophobic phase hangs out and it protects it. So think of it as almost, it forms its own device when you put it on. Okay, so if you were to do that with a regular gel, it just rinses away in like a minute or two and it's gone. These emulsions, they hang around way longer than you think they do. And you can tell they're on there when you first put it on. But if I asked you in 10 minutes after you put it on, is it still there? You would probably say, I think so, because you can still taste the mint. But I can show you pictures where I put physical tracers in there and it's still there. And it lasts 60 minutes or even longer for most people. So you get the contact time without having to wear the device. So it's probably this may sound a little arrogant, but it's the biggest innovation we've had in the bleaching chemistry since peroxide-based bleaching started. For the most part, all the adhesives and gels are all based on the same kinds of principles. This is the first one that goes into the idea of designing a delivery system that targets where we want it to go.
And I read the instructions halfway because I was trying to be a typical patient. And I was like, wait a second, I'm going to have to wear this light for 30 minutes. Like, ugh, I hate this thing. And I was like, wait, that says like wait, how is this stuff staying on my teeth? Like, so I'm painting this on my teeth and then it's going to stay there. And I was like, ain't no way.
So the light.
No way.
Yeah,
and
the light.
It did.
So I was the biggest skeptic of
then,
light for a long, long time. Okay. And I had run research that says light doesn't work. And then I always went back to, man, there sure are a lot of photo bleaching processes that work. Why does this not work? And what I found is that if you do it right, it actually works really, really well. And it's another analogy that, you know, before you crank up the stereo, make sure everybody's at the party. Otherwise, it's just playing to nobody. And you have to get the peroxide to the stain before you light activate it. And if you do it prior to that, it's counterproductive. So when you look at where are the stains in bleaching, they're down within the enamel, and they're most particularly at that dent and enamel interface. And so with the emulsions, you wear it for 30 minutes. That allows everybody to get there. And then once they're there, photochemistry is really, really fast. And so you photoactivate it just for 3 minutes, and it provides a huge boost in the efficacy. So we have both an emulsion without the light and an emulsion with the light. The one with the light works better. Okay, and that's just because once the peroxide is near the stain, and when I say near the stain, it has to be within a chemical bond distance of the stain. When you photoactivate it, the blue light does nothing to the peroxide, but the yellow stain absorbs the blue light and it changes its electronic state. And what I mean by that is the outermost electrons shift to a point where the peroxide can easily take one away. And once you take away an electron from a stain, it becomes colorless. And so that process just accelerates and goes to a further extent once you hit it with the right intensity blue light. And you do have to have the right intensity, and this is one of the things I studied was quantum mechanics as an undergrad. And the best way to describe quantum mechanics is you think of it like a set of stairs. If you don't get your foot up high enough to where it can get onto the first step, you simply go back down to the ground. Okay, and with light chemistry, it's the same thing. Activating that stain is what they call a quantum state. And you have to get your foot up high enough to stand on the stair before you can raise it up. And so there is a certain intensity of light that's required to get the stain to get what we call that photoactivated state. And that's one of the other innovations we put forward with the emulsions is making sure the intensity is right and you apply the light at the right time, which is after the stain has gotten to the peroxide, not when you first put it on. First put it on, it's not doing anything. And we've also shown that, you know, more than three or 4 minutes of light doesn't add anything. It's really fast. So a photochemical reaction, in terms of the rate at which it happens in the order of 10 to the minus 6, means like 5 zeros in a 1 second to 3 zeros in a 1 second. Okay, so that's how fast those chemical reactions go. So you don't need a lot of light exposure to photoactivate the whitening process.
I'm glad you cleared that up because honestly, the things that I had heard from people like yourself maybe 5 years ago was the lights are gimmicky. You know, it's not a thing. Yeah. I guess it makes a lot of sense the way you broke it down, though.
Yeah, if you apply it at the wrong time, in other words, if somebody tells you I've got a 5-minute whitening product, you put this on and you put the light on, you're done in 5 minutes, I can tell you it doesn't work. I don't even need to do the research. It doesn't. If they got a light that's not got the right intensity, it doesn't work. So if a light has a incandescent flashlight bulb with a blue light filter in front of it, it's not even close to getting the intensity you need. So the only thing that will generate the intensity required are LEDs. And you've got to have them with the right current going through them to get the intensity up to where it needs to be. Now, it's still eye safe. Okay, so you got to take into consideration eye safety when you're talking about blue lights. But the blue lights that are out on the market today are safe for the eyes.
And so how do we have this conversation with our patients? I mean, I think you just gave us a lot of great information, but how can we take that down just a little bit and do like an elevator pitch to our patients about why they should be choosing one product or the other, or why we are recommending one product over another?
So, at the end of the day, I don't think anybody wants one that's marginally effective. I think that's one of the things I've learned over the years is that products that lack efficacy really hurt the category because it creates trial rejectors. People say, I'm going to try this, and it just doesn't stick. And so you always want to make sure that fundamentally you're saying, hey, look, there's no substitute for contact time. There's just not. So you've got to have a product that provides 30 minutes of contact time on the teeth, and whether that's a tray or a strip or an emulsion, it doesn't matter. And if you put light at the end of it, it will, increase efficacy somewhere between 40% and even double it. Okay. And I think it's just that simple. And then it just becomes down to a question of cost. And are they willing to wait 30 minutes to put the light on, or do they just want to put something on and go and take it off? So it becomes trying to fit it into their lifestyle. Okay, so it's first and foremost, you got to have concentration and contact time. Secondly, if you want to make it go faster, use a light, but make sure you don't use the light until 30 minutes, and that'll work.
That seems fair. It seems like a good conversation. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about, we didn't ask, that you think it would be very helpful for our audience to know about, or cool little behind the scenes things that happen to create the white strips or emulsions?
Yeah, it's interesting. And one of the things that I do in addition to developing the oral care products is study kind of this innovation process. And it's amazing how similar the invention process is, whether it's developing whitening products or whether you're developing a vaccine or whatever you're doing. It all starts with some sort of curiosity-driven observation. Okay, and for me, it all started with, why are we putting so much peroxide on? How much do we really need? And whenever you unlock that insight, it just leads to a whole bunch of new opportunities. And so, there's just a lot of research going on in these products, not only in whitening, but in the world of your toothpaste and all types of things. There's just a lot of really cool science that's starting to come forward. So it's not only true in the whitening products, but when you think about your oral health, which is something I'm really starting to study now, this idea that your oral health can impact your overall health, and I believe that to be true. I don't have the definitive data, but all this comes together. The last thing about whitening, and this is something we don't talk about with our product designs because it's not allowed from a regulatory standpoint, is whitening your teeth also improves your oral health. Okay, I know some of my regulatory people at P&G are probably cringing right now, but it does. Okay, we don't talk about it, but it does a great thing, and that's just because peroxide's great at getting after some of the bacteria that cause gingivitis and bad breath and those types of things. So overall, whitening is one of the best things you can do for your smile. It's one of the best things you can do for your confidence, especially in times of remote learning where you're on a computer screen all day and you don't know if people are looking at you or not. You just assume everybody's always staring at you. The smile is now something that becomes more prominent than ever. And with everybody kind of coming out of COVID now, thank goodness, at least I hope so, having a nice white smile when you're back out looking for jobs. I mean, there's people that lost their jobs, people are going to be making career changes, and there's just nothing that makes a great first impression as that white smile. And I just think it's great. I've been doing it for a long time now, and I never get tired of talking about it. And it's the one thing that you can talk to a patient or a friend or whatever about that they really do have interest in. They always want to know, well, how does it work? Is it dangerous? The question you asked, Michelle, is so funny. Does it strip my enamel? The answer is no. That's usually like the second question they have. One is, does it work? Two, does it strip my enamel? And three is, can you give me some free product? Those are usually the questions I get.
In that order, yeah.
Unless they just want to get right to the financial part and they say, hey, send me some free product. Okay, yeah, sure.
Well, and I would also hypothesize that if your teeth feel like they look better, you actually want to smile, that there is this drive to also spend a little bit more time. Let me get those gums a little healthier. Let me not have a cavity because I don't want to have to like bleach around a crown or whatever it is. I would think that that kind of leads to a little bit more of a drive in just oral health. Because the same thing with that, like a lot of us, we want to say we work out for our health, but some of it's our health, but also because we feel better, we look better, right. So it's probably the same thing. Like you're getting healthy.
Really interesting thing. And one of the big challenges we faced with white strips when we first launched it was, what's this going to do to people's dental practices? Because people were worried about it, changing the business model and trays and that kind of stuff. And the reality of it is, we were able to show definitively that when people whitened their teeth, they took a huge interest in their smile and other things that weren't quite right.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, whether it was a bleeding gum or restorative that didn't quite match, or the teeth are not quite as aligned as I'd like them to be, it leads to them taking a whole new whole renewed interest in their smile and trying to figure out, wow, instead of it being something I'm not proud of, it becomes something I lead with. And I've just seen that time and time again, and especially post orthodontia. You're coming out of braces.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll have some staining, some yellowness around where brackets were, or even if you're using aligners. Teeth aren't so white, and that's kind of the finishing step. Get them white and get them straight, and you're well on your way to better oral health in many regards. So it does, one leads to the other for sure.
And I would imagine you brought up a point about, if their teeth get a little bit wider, then they're like, oh, they're eyeing them a little bit more. This one's not so straight. That one's starting to turn. But my mind just went to, I imagine emulsions would be a lot, like you could actually get all the teeth whitened versus the strips that would just kind of hit the mountain peaks, not so much the valleys.
Absolutely. And the other thing that you're 100% right. And the other thing that people do is they tend to focus on spots. So if you've got one tooth that's more discolored than the other, or an interproximal area, they tend to like the idea that you can use the applicator to put it in there. And then there's also another pleasant surprise, and you may have experienced this already, which is when you wake up the next morning, your mouth feels a lot fresher and cleaner when you're using the emulsions. And so that just has to do with some of the breath effects from using peroxide. My hope is that and the thing I do love about the emulsions is that you can literally do it wherever you want. If you're getting ready to dry somewhere, put it on and go. If you're getting ready to head into a meeting, you can put it on and sit there and you're whitening your teeth. Nobody knows it. And then it also transformed whitening from being I'll call it a mechanics process into something a little more experiential with the flavors and the smoothness and those types of things. So it's got I kind of want to use it feeling. Our general manager, I might have to send him to Whitening Anonymous. He might do it a little. He's definitely the case. I think he told me one time he used it like 18 times in one day, and I said, holy cow. So, but that's all right. That's just him.
Well, I definitely could say I've learned something in the last 30 minutes. So I am really excited that you came on, and thank you for explaining this whole process to us. That was fascinating.
Anytime. Would love to come back sometime, and I hope that this works out for you and everybody learns a little bit about tooth whitening.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you to Crest, and thank you, Paul, for being such a great guest and explaining things so well to us.
You're welcome.
We hope you enjoyed this episode powered by Crest Oral-B, and be sure to check out the show notes and click the link to get your CE credits for this course. Also, you can check out dentalcare.com for more on-demand CE courses.
And to listen to more great episodes from us, you can go to ataleoftwohygienists.com. You are welcome to send us emails with feedbacks and questions, comments at ataleoftwohygienist@gmail.com. And you can always find us on any of the social media like Facebook and Instagram. And we welcome all direct messages and sharing of all the episodes.
Be sure to stay tuned for more bonus episodes powered each month by Crest Oral-B.
Anything else, Andrew?
I think that's it. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.